Well, 2 months after a magnitude 7.7 earthquake rocked central Myanmar, Asian leaders have called for an expansion of a ceasefire, which is due to run out by the end of May. Myanmar's army vowed a pause in fighting after the disaster that killed more than 3,000 people and left hundreds of thousands displaced, but reports of military attacks have continued. Let's get more on this with UNDP resident representative for Myanmar, Titon Mitra. Titon, good to have you with us again. Now, it has just hit the 2-month mark after that, massive and deadly earthquake. You are in Yangon. What are things like on the ground at the moment?
Good evening, and thank you for having me back again. I just, in fact, returned from the earthquake-affected areas this afternoon. And it's certainly not as grim as it was 2 months ago. Those horrible images of people huddled around collapsed buildings waiting to see whether their family members could be recovered or rescued, the long queues for aid, patients in car parks because the buildings were unsafe, and even the eerily quiet streets. That's not the case. We are seeing life pick up again, but the challenges remain immense. Recovery will certainly take a long, long time. We still have 200,000 people displaced and unable to return to their homes. They're very fearful about the structural integrity of the houses. They often don't have money to undertake the rebuilding or the repairs. And there's fears of aftershocks, and people are cramped in small tents, large families. We have thousands of schools and health facilities that have been destroyed and need to be rebuilt. Small businesses are really, really struggling. They don't have access to finance. They've lost everything, and to restart a business is really challenging. And then on top of that, if you remember that before the earthquake, we had nearly 3.5 million people who were displaced just because of the conflict, and close to 40 million people who are living on subsistence or below subsistence levels. So the task ahead of us is really, really challenging, and there is a lot of work to do with lots of needs.
Yes, so many challenges on so many fronts, but there have also been reports of militia groups restricting the flow of aid and of aid being stockpiled. So is it getting to where it's most needed?
It's a very mixed picture. So where we operate, where UNDP is operating primarily in the urban areas and the areas between the cities of Sagaing and Mandalay, we've had no issues. We can get our trucks through. We've been distributing items. We're starting the rehousing programs. But as you get across what we call the front line, it's a much more complicated story. And as your reports are indicating, those items, just normal trade traffic, is being taxed by both the military and by the opposition groups. At the moment, it is very difficult to get formal agreement to move aid into areas not controlled by the military. And some 30% of the affected population are still in those areas. And it is a challenge to get to them at the scale and to comprehensively respond to their needs.
Yeah, you spoke about 200,000 people who were displaced by the earthquake and countless others in the millions by this long-running civil war. Can you take us through the struggles, the day-to-day struggles of those who remain in shelters? What is it like for them there?
The shelters at the moment, the temporary shelters, are certainly an improvement on what it was 2 months ago, in the sense that there are sanitation facilities and there are a bit more substantial tents. But people don't want to be in shelters, and they want to get back to their places, their own residence. And that's where we're seeing the real challenges, because the cost of materials is skyrocketed. Getting the type of labor you need to rebuild, it's very, very scarce because there's so much reconstruction going on. There's issues about land ownership, and the conditions people are returning to. You have to remember that a lot of these are extremely poor. So we're talking about rebuilding thatched structures made out of wood, and people just don't even have enough money to do something as simple as that. So there is we're estimating probably in the city areas alone 60,000 people have to be rehoused. We have to get agreement from the authorities to make sure that they can return to their places, and we have to build structures which are going to be sufficiently solid that they'll withstand the next earthquake, which is surely going to come.
Yes, and can you give us a sense of how this rebuilding phase is going on? I'd imagine it's still in the very early stages. How long before perhaps a decent number of dwellings are rebuilt?
We would hope by the end of the year, we'll probably have about 20,000 to 30,000 people back into some sort of shelter, but they're going to be very, very basic. If you're talking about buildings which are made out of brick or concrete, that's going to take a lot longer. Our estimate is just in terms of rehousing to get all of the people who need to be rehoused. It could take up to 2 years to do that properly and fully.
Yes, and fellow ASEAN states, they've been calling on the government there to extend the ceasefire beyond the end of this month that's coming up in a few days. What are your hopes for that happening, and how crucial is it as far as the delivery of aid and reconstruction is concerned?
It's absolutely critical. The ceasefire is a non-negotiable in a sense. We need the ceasefire to access the population in need, and we don't have that. Unfortunately, there's been 3 consecutive calls or declarations of ceasefires, but we're still seeing the continuation of airstrikes. Our latest figures show some 300 airstrikes after the earthquake, half of those in earthquake areas. And many very indiscriminate, hitting public buildings, schools. So in those conditions, people have lost everything. They're absolutely scared, and we can't get to them as much as we would need to. So the call by ASEAN to extend the ceasefire, and not only in the earthquake areas, but nationally, is absolutely critical. And we very much hope that call will be heeded.
And finally, Titon, are organizations like the UNDP, yours, getting the funds it needs to do what it needs to progress rebuilding and aid in the context of aid cuts, most notably from the US?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, that there are so many competing priorities. The international community is turning left, right, centre, trying to respond to the next need. And unfortunately, Myanmar in that has been very much neglected. So there is something like 5% of the funds that we've been seeking to meet just the humanitarian needs. The USAID cuts have been devastating, but it's not just the US. There are many, many donors now that are cutting back their aid budgets as they spend more on defence budgets. And when you have a situation like this, you're really depriving people of very critical assistance. And just to give you an example, health centres on the borders that were offering essential services to those who are escaping the fighting cannot get the health services that they need.
Okay, it does sound like there is a long way to go to normalcy. Titon Mitra, really appreciate your time, and we do hope to check back in with you sometime in the near future.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.